The express times by posting a copy of the bulletin board in the municipal building. Beth, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Members Bound, Camperine, Clymer, Coyle, Curry, Dagan, France,
Here.
Lance,
Here.
Stewart, Wolf, Chairman Van
Here. This meeting is solely for the continuation of the hearing that was suspended last evening. This concerns 189 Strikers Road, Block 100, Lot 6, for an asphalt plant. This is an application for preliminary and final major site plan approval. Mr. Meany, is the applicant here?
Thank you.
Here to share. I have one question tested to it. Yes, Neil here to share, Archer and Briner representing precast concrete to the applicant's parcel. Just a question on the decision to have a special meeting. Was that decision made by the clerk, or was that a decision that was made in public at a board meeting to have this meeting tonight? When the notice was sent out.
Of the meeting from last night.
But the notice that was sent out to the papers, was that a decision that was made by the board, or?
The decision was made by the board to provide for 2 meetings because of the number of people.
And the decision was made in public?
That's correct.
Okay, that's all we needed to know. And when was that?
Pardon?
Which meeting was that made at?
That meeting would have been the last regular meeting of the planning board.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Ken Williams, Menon, here on behalf of the applicant, 189 Strikers Road Associates, LLC. We'd like to continue this evening by presenting another witness, a witness who has a family issue that requires him to expedite, and we want to move him up in the order and have his testimony here this evening. We'll have him stick around for cross-examination, and I'm sure then all the other witnesses will be available for cross-examination as well, if you don't mind, with your indulgence. With that, I'd like to call Mr. Bob Frank.
I do. State your name for the record, spell your last name.
Robert Frank, F-R-A-N-K.
Mr. Frank, if you would you please give the board a brief recitation of your experience, education, and qualifications?
I have a bachelor's degree in physics, a master of science in civil engineering from Stanford University. I found myself owning an asphalt company in 1985, developed an expertise during that endeavor in air quality emissions from asphalt plants that developed into my current profession as a sole proprietor, air quality consultant.
Have you testified before boards in the state of New Jersey and been accepted as an expert in air quality permitting?
Yes, I have. I was recently qualified as an expert in front of this board.
And Mr. Frank, is it correct that do you represent any asphalt industry associations?
Yes, I'm the lead negotiator for the New Jersey asphalt industry in DEP regulations.
In that capacity, have you testified on behalf of that association before NJDEP?
I probably wouldn't characterize it that way, but yes.
You represent a number of asphalt plants in New Jersey and adjoining states?
I do. I probably represent 100 different asphalt plants in the region.
And you currently have study projects and work proceeding at several universities in the tri-state area in this field?
Yes, I do. I'm working with professors in Worcester Polytechnic Institute of Massachusetts, Rutgers University, Rowan University, and Auburn University.
And again, to reiterate, you have yourself been an owner and an operator of an asphalt facility?
Yes, very similar to this.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer Mr. Frank as an expert in the field of air quality permitting as well as in asphalt plant operations.
Can I ask some qualification questions?
Sure, go ahead.
Jonathan E. Drill from Stickle, Koenig and Sullivan on behalf of the Township of Greenwich. You're a professor of what?
No, I'm not a professor. I'm not a professor.
Okay, so what's your capacity at Rutgers?
I'm advising research at Rutgers as an industry consultant.
Advising research into what?
Recycled asphalt materials.
Okay, and on behalf of the asphalt industry?
As an individual.
I thought you said on behalf of the asphalt industry.
No, that was negotiations with the DEP on air quality requirements for the industry.
Okay, and what is your role at, you mentioned Worcester, which is
That's in Massachusetts.
is that Clark University or is that the
WPI,
Okay, and
Worcester
what-
Polytechnic Institute.
And what do you do at Worcester Polytechnic?
I advise doctoral candidates,
In what fields?
civil engineering.
And what do you do at Ronan University?
We're working on an asphalt binder study.
Okay, when you were lead negotiator for the Asphalt Association, is the Asphalt Association an asphalt trade group?
Yes.
So you represent the interests of the asphalt industry
I was a hired consultant.
by the asphalt industry.
Correct.
Have you ever done any expert testimony on air quality for anyone other than someone who's in the asphalt industry?
Probably not.
Have you ever been hired by the DEP to do an independent study other than advocating a position for the asphalt industry?
I have never been hired by the DEP.
Have you ever been hired by the EPA to do any sort of independent study other than advocating on behalf of the asphalt industry?
No, I was hired by the Federal Highway Administration to do an emissions study as part of an NCHRP 9-47A as it pertains to warm mix asphalt and the emissions reductions thereof.
Okay, and who else was on that study?
That was the lead investigator was Auburn University, the NCAT research arm of Auburn University. I was a subcontractor to AMS, Advanced Material Science.
If you were a subcontractor to, again, someone in the asphalt industry on that study?
Right. My expertise is in the asphalt industry. I've been in the industry for almost 30 years.
Right, but is it fair to say it's not just your expertise in the asphalt industry, but you are an asphalt industry spokesman and you don't do any work for anyone other than the asphalt industry?
Oh, no. I do the air permitting work for Clayton Industries, Anchor Concrete Products.
Okay, so let's expand that, asphalt industry and the concrete industries.
So my core business is with the construction materials. I mean,
With all due respect, I do not think that he should be qualified as an air quality emissions expert. He is an asphalt and concrete industry. But that's not what an expert is supposed to do, not advocate a position. An expert is supposed to help the board in technical areas where expert testimony and explanation is needed.
First of all, I'd like to admonish the audience to remain silent and hear the witness up here. I'm going to allow him as an expert
Thank you very much. Mr. Frank, under New Jersey state law, can an asphalt manufacturing facility emit any odors which are discernible at the property boundary lines during the asphalt manufacturing process?
New Jersey, as with most states, prohibit the release of odors at the property line that are objectionable or prevent the enjoyment of one's property.
And how does New Jersey's set of standards compare to other states?
In the air permitting arena, the requirements for New Jersey industries in general and the asphalt industry in specific are the most stringent in the nation, with some minor exceptions for plants in Southern California.
Turning to the plant that's proposed, How will dust generated in the manufacturing process be controlled?
Generally, there's probably two sources of dust emissions that are of concern. You have the fugitive emissions from the stockpile areas and the handling of the aggregates in the yard. And then the other area of concern is from the manufacturing process, the rotary dryer, where the bag house has been proven to be state-of-the-art technology for the control of fugitive dust emissions from the manufacturing process.
Who enforces air quality regulations pertaining to an asphalt manufacturing facility?
Primarily, the industry is regulated, and those regulations are enforced by New Jersey DEP. However, the county health department also has authority to enforce those same regulations.
And what triggers the need for an NJDEP air quality permit?
Any manufacturing process that handles more than 50 pounds an hour or burns more than 1 million BTUs in an hour is required to have air permit approval to operate.
And has the air quality permit for this specific project from NJDEP been received by the applicant?
So I prepared the application package, submitted it to DEP for their review. It has been approved. It was approved late last year, and is waiting for the installation and operation of the plant.
Can you briefly describe the permitting, monitoring, testing, and inspection requirements that are imposed by NJDEP?
So the permit approval sets forth performance requirements for this equipment, and it requires the facility to monitor daily operations to assure the state and the community that the plant is operating in conformance with those requirements and restrictions. So on a daily basis, the operator will be required to observe the transfer points on the conveyors and the accurate handling to assure that there's no visible emissions coming up from the transfer points. They'll be required to monitor the pressure drop across the bag house to assure that the bag house control is efficient and effective in removing the particulates from the aggregate dryer airstream.
Will the operation as proposed require multiple air quality permits, or will the entire operation be covered by one permit?
The asphalt manufacturing plant has one permit that's been approved. A second permit would be required for any recycling operations once it's decided upon and ready to be installed.
To expound a little further upon something you said earlier, will there be continuing monitoring of the facility by the applicant?
So in addition to the parametric monitoring that I described for the bag house and the conveyors, there's going to be an initial stack test required, which is a very rigorous verification of compliance with permit limits that's audited by the state. It's done independently by a third party, and that's an initial test. In addition to that, the facility will be required to do an annual burner adjustment to verify that the burner is operating properly, and that test is done on an annual basis. And then there are the dust management practices that the facility will have to undertake on a regular basis that shows that they're inspecting all the components of the plant and keeping them well maintained.
Are you familiar with the type of plant which is proposed for the operation of the subject property?
Yes.
Is it a modern, state-of-the-art facility?
Yes, it is.
And how does that differ then from other types of plants or older plants that may currently be in operation?
Well, you kind of have two criteria here. So on the one hand, you have the state, which is interested in obtaining incremental improvements to the air quality in the state. And so they're doing this by ratcheting down the performance requirements of companies such as the applicant and requiring them to emit even lower levels of emissions than grandfathered plants that have been in existence in the state. So this plant will have to meet the most stringent emission requirements by DEP. In addition to that, it's a modern plant that's designed to operate more efficiently with fewer fugitive emission points, dust sources, than many of the plants that might be out there and grandfathered.
Can you describe the noise that would typically be generated by an asphalt plant and whether there are ways to remediate or ameliorate those noise situations?
So, yes. On the modern plant, noise has been a concern in communities long before this application. And so the plant manufacturers have really worked hard to control the noise with current technology. Historically, there have been maybe 3 points of noise emissions that have been concerned to neighbors. One is from air cylinders on the top of the silo, and they're problematic because they have kind of a direct line of sight to the neighbors. And it's a problem in the spring and the fall when the windows are open, the air is cool, and they're trying to get to sleep at night. However, there's no excuse for these noise. It's a simple silencer can be retrofitted to the air cylinders, and this plant will have those silencers. Another frequent complaint by neighbors is the backup alarms on loaders, beeping, again at night and disturbing them. There's been advances in the technologies used for backup alarms. They now have white noise alarms that are very directional. They dissipate quickly. So really, it only impacts the people in the danger zone, and the noises don't cross the property boundary. A third area that has been somewhat problematic for the industry is from the burner and the noise from the fans on the burner. And again, great progress has been made on the design of burners to reduce the noise from those fans.
So again, to reiterate, with regard to those 3 areas of remediation, particularly with regard to silencers, you've spoken to the applicant has indicated a willingness to install that sort of remediation?
If it's necessary.
And when you say if it's necessary, meaning if it's not already on the plan, correct? And with regard to the special, more modern backup alarm systems, again, you've spoken to the applicant has indicated willingness to have those types of alarms on their pieces of equipment. Is that correct?
That's right.
And again, with regard to the burner, I believe you indicated that because of the state-of-the-art nature of this facility, that would not be a concern. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you believe, Mr. Frank, that dust will be an issue at this facility?
I don't. And the reason I say that is that, not only is this facility regulated by the DEP, but so will the stone suppliers be regulated. And New Jersey has a very stringent requirement on fugitive emission sources. They allow no visible emissions. And this quarry operators are also required to monitor their crushers and conveyors on a daily basis to confirm that they're not generating fugitive emissions. Now, the way they do that is they wet their aggregates. And if you have moisture contents above 1.5%, the EPA has determined that that's sufficient to hold the dust to the aggregate and prevent it from becoming airborne. Well, the stone and the crushed sand that this facility will be receiving typically has 3 to 7% moisture, well above the minimum 1.5% that's required to control fugitive dust emissions from the stockpiles.
And what can you tell us about emissions from the plant that's proposed?
So we probably have 3 categories of emissions. The easiest one are the dust emissions from the bag houses, and they're more of a nuisance. And bag houses have become incredibly efficient, where some will, they achieve 99.99% control efficiency in terms of the removal of dust. So there is literally no dust emissions from the bag house. The other is criteria pollutants, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, total hydrocarbons, those compounds that are precursors to ground level ozone, smog, Those are the pollutants that the state is really ratcheting down and has set the lowest standard for this plant of any plant in the state. And I'm very confident that this plant will be able to comply with those emission limits. The third category is the one that the community is typically concerned about. And those are the hazardous air pollutants, some carcinogenic compounds, and those that have adverse health effects. And so we, as an industry, we've worked very hard in recent years to determine what hazardous air pollutants are emitted from our processes, two, then quantify the amount of those hazardous air pollutants that a typical plant might emit. And we quantified them across a wide range of plants, so that we just didn't take one plant and say, this represents the whole of the industry. And then we used that effort to satisfy the New Jersey's hazardous air pollutant reporting requirements during the permit application process.
Just for the benefit of those who may not have been here yesterday when a previous witness described what a bag house does, could you perhaps just briefly describe what that function is?
A bag house is a huge, very efficient vacuum cleaner. It takes a large volume of air from the rotary dryer, pulls it through a very high-quality filter material that removes all of the airborne dust from the airstream before it's released to the atmosphere. So this particular unit, I think, handles 11,000 cubic feet per minute of air and effectively removes all of the dust from it before releasing it to the atmosphere.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. I have nothing further on direct at this time.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions?
Yeah, as far as it sounds like you're using HEPA filters to filter the air and the dust going out. Is there some way to make sure that they're installed correctly so you don't bypass the filter and get around these dust particles?
So when we were talking about the monitoring requirements that the state imposed on the facility as part of their permit approval, one of the first requirements was this rigorous stat test that was done by a third party and monitored by the state. And that test actually looks for just what you described, the improperly seated bags and any possible short circuit where the dust might be able to bypass the bags and be released to the atmosphere. So the facility will be required to conduct that test within 180 days of commencing operation. And a big part of it is just to verify what you're concerned that the bag house was built and assembled properly.
Now, is there an annual test that's done by the DEP for that, or how do you do periodic inspection for that?
So the facility is required on a daily basis to do a visual observation of the staff to confirm, again, the bar is very low, no visible emissions, so it's zero tolerance. And so that the operator is required to then log on a daily basis that there is no visible emissions, and then if there is, correct it within 24 hours. I don't know that I mentioned it, but the state also comes out 3 to 5 times a year during a unannounced inspection, and they're going to be looking at these emission points as well to confirm that, the operator is in fact achieving no visible emissions from the facility.
Is there a continuous emission monitoring of any materials being released?
There is none. So there is continuous monitoring requirements and record keeping, but those are for parametric monitoring of the parameters of the plant. So the facility is going to have to monitor continuously the pressure drop across the bag house and the temperature at the inlet of the bag house and record both of those values on a daily basis. Then there's the annual burn tune-up that looks at the criteria pollutants, carbon monoxide, total hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides, and to confirm that they are also within the permit limits. but there's no continuous emission monitoring, and there's not a continuous opacity monitor that's required on this side of the facility.
There was a mention of state-of-the-art. I think in the DEP term, state-of-the-art is meaning the latest and greatest technology to minimize emissions and any dust particles leaving, et cetera, that type of deal. Is that the terminology that was used earlier, state-of-the-art? Is that meaning the DEP state-of-the-art terminology, or is that just a general term you were using?
You're that when the plant was described as being state-of-the-art, that was kind of a generic term, as being the best that the manufacturing industry has to offer today for producers to purchase. However, at the same time, the state has also imposed state-of-the-art performance requirements on the emissions from this facility. And so it does have to meet that rigorous state definition and the state standards for the gaseous pollutants and particulates.
If there was a emission violation, what would be required of the operators of the plant?
The plant would be required to correct it. So on the baghouse, if he had a visible emission from the baghouse, he has to correct it within 24 hours. And if he can't correct it within 24 hours, he has to call an 800 hotline number and self-disclose to the DEP that he has this emission and he has not been able to correct it.
What's the DEP do at that point in time?
We have an expert testify on that. Okay.
Yeah.
We have the board has hired experts in this area to call upon Ms. Susan Angle to question the witness or verify the witness or verify to the board statements or could you state the qualifications?
Sure. Let me start with that. Again, my name is Susan Angle, and I've been retained by the board to serve as a technical expert on air emissions, air permitting, and environmental compliance issues. My background, I have a degree in chemical engineering from Villanova University, and I'm a registered professional engineer. Yes?
Since the witness will be testifying, since there are three attorneys, if she could just be sworn in.
Sure, that's fine.
We're making a record, that's all.
Sure.
Just stand up. Raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth,
I do.
state your name for the record, please, and last spelling of it.
Susan Angle, A-N-G-Y-A-L. Okay. Again, degree in chemical engineering, and I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. Part of my 18-year professional career was spent with the US EPA, where I developed federal air toxics regulations for hazardous air pollutants. I also worked at the New Jersey DEP in the Air Permitting Bureau, where I was responsible for a technical review of air permit applications for various types of facilities, including some asphalt plants. The balance of my career has been in private consulting, including serving as technical expert on air toxics and dust issues for a community action panel.
I would deem this witness as a qualified expert.
Okay. Okay, I just, if I could, I'll just review, I'll just summarize the review that I did of the air permit issues associated with the applicant. I reviewed the types of sources proposed for the site and assessed the potential for air emissions. I reviewed control technologies, air emission estimates, and the risk assessment prepared by the applicant's consultant for comprehensiveness and technical accuracy. I interviewed the applicant's consultant to discuss his approach and assumptions, and I also reviewed the air permit that has thus far been issued by the NJDEP. If I could, I'll just summarize my findings from that review. And we've heard much of this before in various testimony, but the plant proposed for Strikers Road does include several sources with the potential to emit air pollutants. All but the crushing or recycling operations are addressed in an air permit that has been issued by the New Jersey DEP. As we've heard, that would require a separate NJDEP approval, and the planning board approvals are contingent upon receipt of all NJDEP approvals. To reiterate a little bit what Mr. Frank had explained, emissions from the asphalt plant are related to the fuel used in the drying process and dust or particulates, as they're known in the regulatory venue, from the material handling and processing. And in plants of this nature, fuels used may include natural gas, fuel oil, or used oils. From an air emissions and toxic standpoint, natural gas is the preferred fuel as it's the cleanest burning. Used oil is the least clean. The Strikers Road application identifies natural gas as the fuel, so they will be using the cleanest fuel, except in rare instances when natural gas supply may be curtailed, and then they will use fuel oil but not used oil. The plant is never permitted to burn used oil. Again, as we heard from several witnesses, the particulate emissions are collected and controlled by the bag house. Again, a large filter removing over 99% of the emissions. I concur that this is considered state-of-the-art, which is a technical term under NJDEP regulations, meaning it is at least as stringent as the best controlled plants. It also exceeds the federal EPA standards for asphalt plants. As we heard, the other limitations in the permit are on monitoring and also on the amount of fuel used and the amount of production. So the air permit imposes operational limitations as well as emission limitations. It's the applicant's job to represent to the DEP the worst case air emissions that might occur from a plant. In my review of the application, I would concur that this was done. In fact, the applicant generally assumed, made some very conservative assumptions, meaning that he in fact overstated emissions, assuming a worst case fuel even though clean burning natural gas will be used. Further, as we heard, in this particular industry, there is test data available that confirms that emission factors are reliable. Oftentimes, when someone submits an air permit application, the only available data are published emission factors that vary in their degree of reliability. So the fact that there was test data available supports those factors. Of course, even small quantities of emissions are reviewed by NJDEP to assess their potential risk. And the NJDEP has published protocols that must be followed to assess the risk that is proposed by the proposed plant. These protocols are likewise very conservative, meaning that they tend to overstate the risk. And in this case, the plant met NJDEP criteria for risk, even under the protocol's most conservative assumptions. Also, risk is measured at the fence line of a plant, and risk diminishes as you move away from the plant. So, in summary, my takeaway is that the plant is highly controlled and emissions and risk are adequately represented by the air permit. A valid question that is often raised is, how do we know that the applicant will operate in the manner that is represented to the NJDEP? And in my opinion, there's 3 tools available to the NJDEP, and they are all embedded in the permit. The one is the stack emission testing that we heard described. A stack emission test in New Jersey requires a protocol submittal to NJDEP for approval, and two representatives from the NJDEP attend the test, which is done by a third party. It's someone from the DEP Enforcement Bureau and the Testing Bureau. So that is one tool that they use to make sure that the emissions as portrayed are accurate. Secondly, there is continuous process monitoring required, and that is a tool that they use to, as the plant operates, they use these as indicators of compliance. One of them is the visible emissions that was mentioned, and there's also monitoring requirements for the baghouse. And then finally, of course, the state has the right at any time to have an unannounced visit and to inspect the plant for its operations and for its record keeping to make sure that records are being maintained as required. A New Jersey air permit is typically very rigorous in that it requires a lot of monitoring and data collection and record keeping. And then just as DEP has tools to make sure that the plant is doing what they said they would do, the community in which the plant is located has tools that they can use as well. Every plant in New Jersey is prohibited from having odor, noise, or any nuisance beyond its fence line that in some way infringes on your enjoyment of life. And a tool at your disposal to make sure that that is not happening is to call the NJDEP hotline. And that is a number right on NJDEP's website. And just so you understand how that's handled, every hotline notification is assigned a tracking number, and the DEP takes those very seriously, and they are followed up upon. And then NJDEP has the right to issue significant penalties depending on what they find in response to that hotline notification. And the other thing that I would note for community members is that other useful information is available on the DEP website. The AIR program in particular publishes copies of permits and their state-of-the-art requirements, etc., and that it's very available for viewing. So from an air emissions and permitting perspective, I had no further questions or recommendations for the applicant. You know, of course, with the qualification that if there were crushing or recycling operations, that they would have to go through the same air permitting process.
Thank you very much. We have another available expert with us this evening, Mr. Bradley Campbell. He is the past Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Ask if you could comment on the permitting process. Anyone else you'd like to comment on?
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, he can still be sworn in.
Sure.
He'll be able to represent. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? State your name, spell your last name, please.
Bradley M. Campbell, C-A-M-P-B-E-L-L. Good evening, my name is Brad Campbell, and I was retained by the board to consider the adequacy of the application in terms of its compliance with environmental standards and protections. My background, and I have spent 4 years as Commissioner of New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection from 2002 to 2006. I was Regional Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection 1999 to 2001. Prior to that, I was an Associate Director of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Prior to that, I was I was a trial attorney with the Environment Division of the United States Department of Justice, responsible for enforcing federal environmental law. Along the way, I've been a commissioner of a number of interstate regulatory bodies as well, including the Ohio Valley Sanitary Commission and the Delaware River Basin Commission. With that, I would submit my credentials as an expert.
I would recognize him as an expert in those fields.
As I said, I was asked to regard the adequacy, review the adequacy of the application in terms of environmental standards and safeguards. Some of the things I'll mention are still to come in terms of compliance, but by the terms of the ordinance, this facility must, in addition to the demonstration of compliance that's already made in the air permit, must satisfy all of DEP's requirements. And I think it's important to bear in mind, as Ms. Engel's testimony pointed out, This is an industry in which, unlike many areas of environmental protection where the regulations are kind of one size fits all across a number of different types of facilities, this is an area where both in terms of air and stormwater, DEP and federal regulators really undertook to tailor regulations specifically to the type of facility involved. Susan Zangel went over some of the areas, particularly to air emissions. The same is true with stormwater. A number of issues were, a number of public comments concerned stormwater. This facility will have to comply with the stormwater general permit, which again is a permit that was designed specifically for these facilities. It includes a number of elements, including a stormwater pollution control plan, and very specific limits in terms of what types of runoff can be, what constituents can be in the stormwater that's managed at the plant. Standards for total dissolved solids, chemical oxygen demand, and so forth. And again, this is, the applicant in this case has not yet applied for the permit, but by the terms of the ordinance, the applicant will have to comply with those requirements, which include a drainage control plan and monitoring specifically what the runoff is for 12 storm events. They have to monitor that and report it to the DEP. So that's part of the regulatory structure imposed on this plan. I would also note and affirm the testimony that was offered earlier that there are no regulated features on this site in terms of wetlands or stream corridors. The nearest buffer is approximately, nearest regulated feature is approximately 700 feet away. And by way of background, when we adopted, I was commissioner when we adopted the 300-foot buffer requirement for high-quality streams. At that time, 300 feet was the maximum distance that you could show that there would be any impact to a stream. In this case, we're talking about a facility that's more than 700 feet or 2 football fields away from the nearest regulated feature. So I think it's important to bear that in mind in terms of the science of runoff and its impact to water quality. The fact that there aren't those regulated features mean there aren't specific requirements that apply by DEP with respect to wildlife. In this case, the only feature we've been made aware of has been a nest that's actually across Strikers Road, about a third of a mile away from the site. And the site is nestled in between 2 other industrial sites. Even if there were regulated features, there would not be, in my opinion, any additional requirements for this site because the site itself, already disturbed, would not be considered habitat, in my opinion. As was mentioned, there were the terms and conditions of all these permits are subject to public enforcement, either by calling the EPP hotline or through bringing an Environmental Rights Act action. And those extend to every aspect of this facility, from the provisions on noise and dust to the prohibitions on idling of trucks outside a facility like this. So in summary, I would submit to the board that in terms of compliance with existing environmental protections and safeguards, the application is satisfactory, and with at least for those areas where they have not yet made an application, as in the case of stormwater, the terms of the ordinance will require them to do so, and that those standards are adequately protected.
George, any comments or questions?
I had only one question, and that deals with the bag house or any of the residues that they collect. Is that, when they go to clean that and dispose of it, is there any regulations, concerns on how that's disposed of? Or is there any material coming off that has to be put in a landfill, handled that way?
No, the fines that are collected by the bag house are returned back into the mix and incorporated in the mix and are a critical element to producing a durable, long-life material. So they take great care in metering the raw materials going into the plant so that the amount of fines that are in the cold feeds are the amount of fines that they need to end up with in the mix.
Thank you.
Further questions? At this time? At this time, I'll open it up to the public to ask questions of this witness. We're going to limit this to 15 minutes of questioning.
Can I ask you two board experts, or am I limited to this witness?
Ask this question.
Yes, set two, I have parts for you, but it's set one for each. Mr. Campbell, what environmental regulations apply once a truck leaves the facility?
Those regulations would be by the Department of Transportation, so I'm not that there would be.
No, are there any environmental regulations that apply? I know the DOT regulations. Are there any environmental regulations that apply once a truck leaves the plant with asphalt in it?
They would still be subject to the anti-idling provisions, but beyond that, there would be DOT regulations.
Okay, and then, I forget your name?
Susan Engel.
Ms. Engel, you said that you had reviewed the application in some report. I was looking at the entire file yesterday. I didn't see the report you were referring to. Is that a report that they filed with the DEP and not with the board?
I don't recall referencing a report. I reviewed the air permit application as well as the background calculations and documentation that support that.
Right, those documents, the background calculations and the
Yes.
supporting documents, are they on file with this board?
They're with the NJDEP.
So I mean, I can just make a representation. They're not in the board file.
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I know the answer to that, but because you went down to the DEP, or did you ask the applicant to supply you with the information?
I had the information from the applicant.
Thank you. Should I just ask my questions of him now? Or? Did you file a report with the board, or you're just giving your oral report right now?
I'm just giving my report now.
Thank you. Hey, Mr. Frank, you testified that the proposed plant would comply with all noise regulations, correct? Yes. Do you know what the DEP noise regulations are during the day? The maximum decibels?
I believe it's 65 decibels at the property line.
Okay, and what about at night?
I'm not presenting myself as a noise expert.
Yeah, but you were asked noise questions and you answered them, and you answered them in a capacity. It sure appeared to me that you were trying to be an expert about it.
I'm going to object here, Mr. Chairman. The reason I'm objecting to two things is we know fact and expert witnesses. The man testified he ran an asphalt plant. He represents asphalt plants. He goes to asphalt plants. He doesn't have to be an expert to testify as to he's found as to the noise generating from it. When we see something, we can testify to it. He's certainly seen enough cement asphalt plants, probably with almost anyone else. He's testifying as to what he's seen. You don't have to be an expert. It's the experience he's got.
I'm not objecting to him being an expert. The chairman already overruled my objection. He's qualified as an expert. The expert just testified, Mr. Bernstein, that the plant's going to comply with all noise regulations, yet he doesn't even know what the noise regulation is at night. I'm entitled to ask him the question.
You can ask the question, but I think his answers were appropriate. I thought you were trying to say he's not entitled to.
No, I don't think he knows what he's talking about, but he's already...
Further down protocol, have it clear.
You don't know what the number of decibel limitation at night in the New Jersey noise code is, do you?
It's 50.
Okay, so now you know it's 50?
I've never said that I didn't know. I only said I didn't present myself as being a noise expert.
Did you review the applicant's environmental impact statement that they filed with the application?
I did not.
Okay. So you wouldn't be aware that on page 10, the applicant says that the existing noise levels could be much higher, possibly in the 60+ range. You're not aware of that?
No, I did not read it, so I'm not aware.
Okay, if it was 60+ at night, you would concede that that would be a violation of the New Jersey Noise Code, correct?
I think that's out of order. He has already said that he's not a noise expert.
I'm not.
He didn't read the report. He's asking questions about the report.
Okay, now how about this? I'm not asking questions about the report now. If the noise level at the plant was 60 decibels at night, would you not concede that that would violate the New Jersey Noise Code?
It would, but I maintain that the plant will not need to, the plant will be able to comply with the 50 decibel ordinance at the property line of the receiving lot.
Okay, so how will it do that then?
What is the noise source that is the offensive source?
Well, how about the front-end loaders that are picking up the aggregate and putting them into the...
Cold bin?
Yes.
So the noise that has been problematic on loaders has been backup alarms. The solution has been...
Oh, I heard the solution, but do you know on personal knowledge that they're less than 50 decibels on those backup alarms? Can you testify on personal knowledge that it's less than 50 decibels at night? Yes or no?
Well, I've done noise studies for facilities at the property line of a neighbor that complained. And in that noise study, the loader was not problematic.
How many decibels came out of the loader at the loader? We'll get to the property line after. Do you know how many decibels were generated by the loader's backup alarm? Okay. So do you know how many feet from where the stockpiles are is the nearest property line in the site?
I really...
So you don't know that either? No. Okay, so you can't answer the questions I'm asking.
I can't answer any of your questions.
You can't answer the question. It's better to say I can't answer than try to answer. Is it your opinion that the only air quality impacts expected from the plant would be on-site truck traffic to and from the site?
Well, no. We have a permit that allows us to emit certain quantities of numerous gases.
I was just reading what the EIS said. You don't agree with the statement I just read? Do you... Now, there was a very good explanation about what sort of monitoring or testing is required by the permit. You heard the testimony?
I gave some testimony.
I'm not talking about your testimony. I'm talking about the board's expert's testimony. Did you hear what she said?
Yes.
Do you agree with her that there's no daily, weekly, or monthly inspection or monitoring of emissions? Put it this way, she said that there was a test, a test of the stack, correct?
Correct.
Is that a one-time test?
It's an initial test, and I'm not certain about this particular permit, but it's becoming the practice to be a 5-year requirement.
Have you reviewed the permit?
I have.
Okay, so you just don't remember if the permit requires an initial test or one every 5 years?
That's correct.
And she talked about an annual test of the burner, correct?
I don't believe so. I believe that was my testimony.
I did not talk about that.
Okay, so that was your testimony?
Yes.
So they test the burner once a year?
That's correct.
So other than once a year testing the burner and an initial test of the stack or subsequent 5-year test of the stack, is there any monitoring of the emissions other than, I'm not talking about visual, is there any monitoring of the emissions from the site?
So there's what The method that has been established as being absolutely sufficient, necessary and sufficient is process monitoring. It's required to be done on a daily basis.
What is a process monitoring? It's looking to see that the thing doesn't get too hot and everything is running, it doesn't break down, correct?
That's correct.
So there's, again, this is an easy question. Other than the initial stack test, maybe every 5 years, and the annual burner test, there's no monitoring of emissions, correct?
No direct measurement of emissions, that's correct.
And then you had said that the regulations don't allow visible emissions, correct?
That's correct.
What about invisible emissions, but that have particles that you can't see, but that are hazardous?
Give me an example.
You said that the regulations don't allow visible emissions, correct?
Correct.
But are you aware of any emissions that could come from the plant that you wouldn't be able to see?
All the gaseous emissions.
Right. The regulations also regulate that, though, correct?
That's correct.
But if you can't see it, and there's no monitoring of those emissions, how do you know that they're happening within the permit limit?
Well, we do the annual adjustment.
Right. Other than the annual adjustment and other than the initial test of the stack, how do you know on a weekly and monthly basis, if you can't see the gas emissions, how do you know that they're complying with the permit limitation?
So we establish through the periodic measurement. So we started out as an industry checking every 500 hours because of this concern. How do you know? You just do the test once, and then how do I know that 2 weeks later something didn't change? And so we started out having to test every 500 hours. This was back in 1994. And since 1994, these facilities had to test every 500 hours to make sure that their emissions were in compliance with the permit limit. We developed from that a significant database showing the reliability and the compliance history of these sources over time. That was then used as the basis to say, you can open that window up.
I understand why they
Why don't you let him answer the question?
because he's not
answering the question, sir.
With all due respect, Mr. Palmer, he's not answering my question. He's answering some other
He was
question.
explaining,
I asked him,
to explain in reference to your question.
I asked him, how do you know if you can't see it, if the emissions are exceeding the permit? He's answering why they don't do it.
Let him answer, and then we'll see. If
I keep on talking, and then we'll see if he answers my question.
We tested on 500-hour intervals to verify that over the period, the process remained in compliance with the permit.
Where'd you test that?
We tested at the stack, the exhaust stack.
Which exhaust stack? You're talking about a particular study you did?
No, every asphalt plant in New Jersey is required since 1994 to monitor their emissions at the stack at 500-hour intervals after the initial compliance stack test. To demonstrate the plant continued to operate in compliance after that initial stack test and remained in compliance for the duration of the permit. That body of information that has been gained since 1994 was sufficient to justify opening up that period to an annual basis so that the community and the regulators had reasonable confidence that the facility remained in compliance with the limits established by the permit. And that 1 year is sufficient to assure the community and the regulators that it did not deviate significantly from the limits.
Are you done?
Yes.
Now I'm going to ask my question again. How do you know if you only test once a year? How do you know if the emissions are within the permit? Don't explain why they're not doing it weekly or monthly. How do you know if you don't do it that the emissions are within the limits? Probability, you're saying?
I think that's been asked and answered.
I don't think you can answer.
Hard. Been asked and answered.
What was the answer then?
The answer was the continuous testing for 500 hours since 1994 to come through. This
I think you missed it. I think he said they started doing that, they don't do it anymore. He was trying to explain why they don't do it, and I want to know if they don't do it, how do you know if you're within the limits of your permit? You haven't answered that, have you?
Excuse me if I could provide some clarification. In New Jersey, you talk about continuous emissions monitoring. It is only very, very large sources in the state of New Jersey that are required to do that. So what's found in this permit is typical for, let's just say, everyone else. And maybe I can try to answer your question because I have read the permits right in front of me.
Can I give you my question in a nutshell? Because you probably will be able to answer the
I'm
question.
going to try and give you it in a nutshell. The NJDEP has established that they do an initial test to measure emissions and confirm that they are within the limits dictated by the permit. On an ongoing basis, they have selected certain parameters that they say, they agree, tell them that control equipment is operating as it's designed. In the case of this plant, they have to measure the pressure drop across the baghouse. And the DEP has identified that as the parameter that tells them the baghouse is operating as it's been designed. If it's operating as it's been designed, it's removing 99+% of the emissions. So I don't know if that helps you understand sort of the regulatory process for ensuring compliance on an ongoing basis.
Well, my question was coming from Mr. Campbell testified that if a citizen, for example, saw visible emission, saw some problem, there's an 800 number to call the DEP. What I'm trying to get an answer to is, other than a visible emission, and if you don't have 500-hour weekly, monthly monitoring, how would a citizen know to call the 800 number on a gaseous emission? That's my question in a nutshell. Maybe you guys can answer.
If a citizen, through their observations, whether it's sight, sound, smell.
But it's not visible, that's what I'm saying. It's not an odor, it's not visible. It's the gaseous emissions that he's talking about, which are regulated under the permit. If you can't see it and you can't smell it, but you know that sometimes they're exceeded,
How do you know they're exceeded then? That's what I'm confused.
That's what I'm asking you. How do you know if they're exceeded or not? If they're not
that's the
monitored?
monitoring that I just described. Now, if there were a smell, an odor, a dust issue that appeared atypical that you hadn't noticed before, these are indicators that I would suggest you call the hotline and that let the NJDEP investigate it.
The answer is if you see it or you smell it, you know about it, but if it's an invisible gaseous emission, there's just no way of knowing. We're assuming, based on whatever experience that you guys have, that the yearly test is enough to do it, correct?